Live from Sin City, it's the Socks and Pinstripes podcast. And now, here's the star of the show, Diet Dr. Griffin!
Haderade. This is Diet Dr. Griffin back with another episode of the Socks and Pinstripes podcast. Josh Hader signed a 5-year, $95 million contract with the Houston Astros. I did not have that one on my bingo card. The Astros already have one of the strongest bullpens in baseball with their anchor at the end, Ryan Pressly. Usually you don't go out and spend $95 million on a closer when you already have a closer. Pressly's down kind of years, like the one he had this year, are still better than most of the closers in baseball, and he still managed 31 saves. He's also been dynamite during the postseason and has been a major piece of the Astros championship team in 2021. However, Pressly is getting up there in age, and he also has 1 year left on his deal with a mutual option for next year. Let me tell you a thing about mutual options. They pretty much never, ever happen because one side or the other is always going to decline the deal. And there is only one instance that I am aware of that a mutual offer was accepted by both parties, whose name happens to escape me at the time of recording. Sorry. Pressly will likely end up walking after the season because he's an established closer who's going to want to close on a team, and another team will pay him good money to do so. The Astros managed to get younger and better at one of the league's toughest positions. You also have to factor in that Kendall Graveman is out for the season with a shoulder issue. And another big part of the bullpen, Hector Neris, is a free agent and likely not to return. All in all, this looks like a pretty savvy move by a savvy run franchise. And the Astros are looking like they're going to be contenders again in this upcoming season with one of the top bullpens in the game. You got the three hammers in the back. You got Abreu at 7, Pressly at 8, Hader at 9. If those three are healthy in the playoffs, it's going to be very, very tough to beat that bullpen. Speaking of bullpens, Robin Stevenson, just as I started recording, signed a 3-year deal with the Angels. He is a reliever who's bounced around quite a bit and was most recently in Tampa Bay after being traded there from the Pirates. And I just have to say that the Angels tend to make some of the dumber free agency moves out there, but this could be one that might actually work out because it's a low-risk reliever. I don't know the terms of the contract besides that it is 3 years in length. Another reliever who signed this week is Yariel Rodriguez. He's been playing for the Chunichi Dragons in Japan from 2020 to 2022 and played on the Cuban World Baseball Classic team in 2023. Interesting situation with this guy. He apparently requested to leave and wasn't allowed to leave his franchise this year. He tried to go and sign with Major League Baseball after the World Baseball Classic, but he was basically held back by his Japanese team. So now, after they've released him, he's a free agent, signed a deal with the Toronto Blue Jays, 4 years, $32 million. It's unclear if he's going to be a starter or a bullpen player. He was strictly a bullpen guy in Japan, but he was used as a starter in the WBC. And He also did not pitch at all in 2023. So it's very interesting to see if he tries to become a starter after missing an entire season, or are they just going to put him in a reliever and put him in some medium to high leverage situations? Well, that's basically it for free agency this week. And two of those moves that happened earlier this afternoon, which is Friday, January 19th. So I'm going to dedicate the rest of this episode to fantasy baseball topics, particularly for beginners who have never played the game before. There are basically two different formats of fantasy baseball. There's the traditional rotisserie style, which basically means that you have your league of X number of teams, and then you who does the best overall in each of the categories for the season. So who has the most RBIs, most runs, most home runs, those sorts of things. While more often people will play head to head, which is you go up against another team in your league each week, and whoever's team has the best stats wins. This is very much like how fantasy football runs, and it's an easy gateway for people who play fantasy baseball. Of the scoring format, there are typically 10 different categories which the stats are recorded and scored. For standard leagues, you have batting average, runs, home runs, RBI, and stolen bases. For pitching, you have wins, ERA, strikeouts, WHIP, which is walks and hits per innings pitched, and saves. This is referred to as a 5x5 format because there are 5 hitting categories and 5 pitching categories. Now, before we get too far along here, the one thing that is different about fantasy baseball versus, say, fantasy football is there is a much, much larger time commitment. Most fantasy baseball leagues are daily leagues, which means you adjust the lineups of your teams on each day. During the course of 162 games for every team, you're going to have games on nearly every single day. And the players on your team are rotated out of the lineup, so they're not always playing every day. Pitchers don't start every day as well, so you have to rotate those around. It's a major, major commitment for those who are new to the game. It's not as, it's harder than, say, fantasy basketball or fantasy hockey, but fantasy football, you basically set your lineup a couple times a week. So you can really mess yourself up if you're not ready for the commitment of fantasy baseball. And that's fine if you don't want to play. That's perfectly cool. Now, as a beginner, I would say you will probably either want to start in a private league with a friend or something if you get invited in. I've known that to happen a few times. Or with a public league, because public leagues are the most straightforward, easy ways to get in with scoring, with rules. It's just a very general, kind of casual format where you can kind of get your feet wet before you dive into the more private leagues. Each team will draft a lineup. You are allowed to auto draft it. It's a lot more fun, though, if you draft your own team. That said, there's a lot of different draft strategies, and I'm going to get into that in a separate episode. Your normal league, and I'm using Yahoo as my basis for this, as they're the only ones that I have played a regular league on, typically will have 23 players on there. You'll have a catcher, first baseman, second baseman, shortstop, third base, 3 outfielders, and then 2 utility spots, which can be occupied by any position. There are also utility exclusive players like Shohei Ohtani hitter. Yes, Shohei Ohtani is considered two different players on Yahoo. There are other companies that treat Ohtani as one player, and that's a little more complicated. For the pitching side, you will generally have two starting pitchers, two relief pitchers, and then four pitcher slots, which can be occupied by either starters or relievers. There are many players who have multi-positional eligibilities. So, for example, Mookie Betts qualifies as both a second baseman and an outfielder. These are adjusted each year based upon the number of games played at those positions. If, for example, Mookie Betts plays exclusively at second base, which is what I have heard from the Dodgers this year, in the following year he would therefore lose outfield eligibility. On that same note, a player can gain eligibility at a new position so long as they meet the requirements, which on Yahoo is 5 games started or 10 games basically like finished or subbed out. So if somebody starts the game in the outfield and then they get moved over to second base, that would count towards the 10, not the 5. Each team will also have a set number of IL spots, which is basically where you can stick one of your players when they get injured, which is inevitably going to happen during the season. There are also players who will start the season on the injured list, and you can just stash them away immediately. Some leagues will have what is referred to as a not available spot, or NA. This is a spot where you can stick a minor leaguer or a major leaguer who has been put on the bereavement list when someone in their family has passed away, or oftentimes on the paternity list, which happens when one of them has had a child. These are short-term lists where you can pop somebody off and then grab a temporary replacement player. Each week there will be a innings requirement, which is the minimum number of innings that you have to pitch. You don't have to basically start every single pitcher that you have for every single start, but you do have to make that innings requirement, or else all of your pitching stats will be zeroed out and forfeited to your opponent. Each week, you are typically allotted 6 moves, which means that you have 6 players that you can add each week. You are allowed to cut an unlimited number of players, though. You are not required to use all of those moves, but it may come in handy depending upon your individual matchup. A player usually has to wait for 2 full days before another team is allowed to pick them up. And in traditional leagues, there is a sequential waiver number where each team is assigned a number which is reverse of their draft order. So the team that drafts first will have the worst waiver number initially, and the team that drafts last in each round will have the highest waiver priority, which would be the lowest number. When a team opts to use their waiver on a player, it would bump them back to the 12th spot in a 12-team league, the lowest priority spot, and everyone gets bumped up 1 up to the number of the person who used the waiver. Yahoo did switch over to a fab dollar system, which is like a free agent bidding system where you have a set number of dollars over the course of a year. I think the number is 1,000. I have not played in one of these leagues, and I did not want the Marty Cordova League to use that. but you basically have that set number of dollars, and then you can bid on players, and whoever has the highest amount of fab dollars used up will get the player. But there's also that thing where you have the set number of dollars per season, so you have to be careful on how you use your money. When I played in a public league, you also weren't allowed to make roster moves that day. So if you picked up a player, you wouldn't be able to stick them in the lineup that day. Most private leagues I have seen have switched over to a same day format where you can pick up a player and then start them that day. Lineups will set themselves when the individual games start for each player. So sometimes you'll have games that start at 9 in the morning. I'm on the West Coast. And sometimes you'll have games starting at 7 o'clock at night, and it creates interesting situations where you have to make decisions upon who you are starting in your lineup based upon the time of the games. After, say, 22 weeks of regular season play, you have a 3-week playoff format in your league where the top 6 teams will go up against each other, with the first 2 teams getting a bye in the first round and then going in a traditional format until a champion is determined. All in all, fantasy baseball is a lot of fun, but it is a major time commitment, so understand that in advance if you are going to decide to play. I can tell you that from personal experience, I have grown a greater appreciation for the game itself because I have gotten to see many, many excellent players play and follow many excellent players over the course of a season. You're going to get a lot of guys on your team that play for teams you don't know, or you're going to get guys on teams that are your rival, and it creates a very interesting dynamic. As a Red Sox fan, it's always strange to have Yankees players on your team. And sometimes you can get some of your favorite players on your team or make new favorites. Like Juan Soto is a guy who's become one of my favorite players in baseball from having him on a fantasy team. Anywho, that's all I got for today's episode. Hopefully, we'll have some more free agent news to discuss, and if not, I might consider bringing up some draft information, although the drafts themselves have not opened up yet on Yahoo, so I may wait on that until I've had a chance to run a few drafts myself. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great time till next time. Ta-ta!